Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Friday, January the 24th. And welcome to our commentary. Well, a couple of big things today that I want to get into. First of all, the border crackdown has begun, or the immigration crackdown. And some people are a bit surprised about this, but I'm not, because this had been a campaign topic and they were promising they were going to do this, and especially after the victory that they had. I'm not surprised that this is happening. It's going to be very interesting to see how Mexico reacts, because these people are going back to their country, but they're going generally through Mexico. So it'll be interesting to see how they react to all of this. But at least for the time being, the crackdown has begun. And as they have told us before, they were going to focus on some of the criminal elements, and that seems to be what they're doing. And I think the message is clear. The message, they're also sending some Marines to the border. So I think the message is clear that things are going to be different, and that getting into the United States is going to be more complicated than ever before. So I'm not surprised. I think everybody expected this. I guess, when a president keeps a promise, people seem a bit surprised, but I'm not surprised by any of it. I knew that it was coming. It was only a matter of waiting and seeing what exactly they were going to do with it. The big issue, of course, now is what happens with sanctuary cities, and what happens with some of the politicians and some of the cities who are refusing to cooperate. We will see, and I think we're going to see that very quickly. I think you're going to see ICE and the director of the border, Mr. Holman. I think you're going to see him taking some very decisive action against, or at least warning these politicians to get out of the way. And let's see how that works out. But I'm not surprised that there's a border crackdown, because it was coming, and it was coming over time. There's no question, no question about that whatsoever. The other big story, of course, is President Trump, going coast to coast here, going to North Carolina today and spending much of the day in North Carolina, at least part of the morning in North Carolina, visiting some of the areas there. I'm still amazed at how many months ago it was that this happened in North Carolina, and here we are. And there are still areas of North Carolina that have not been reconstructed. It's just amazing to me, how badly it was out there. And, I don't want to get into the blame game, but somebody has to be held accountable for the fact that many of those people out there are still waiting for help, or haven't gotten the help they were supposed to get. And, President Trump today in North Carolina said that he might want to eliminate FEMA and basically turn it over to the states, and let the governor of each state be accountable for the whole thing. Actually, that's not a bad idea. That's not a bad idea. I thought that's the way it was right now, and that FEMA was basically supporting the local government. But I think it should be the local government, the responsibility. And I think that way you can hold one person accountable, whether it's the governor of North Carolina, the governor of Florida, the governor of Texas, wherever it may be, and hold one person accountable for how the crisis was managed. But there's no question that the situation in North Carolina is regrettable. And I don't know whether it's the governor's fault or FEMA's fault. I honestly don't know that kind of information. But the people out there deserved a much better treatment from their government than what they've gotten. I don't know how else to say. Now, the other part of the trip, President Trump is on his way. Well, I guess he just landed. I saw in the news that he landed in LA, and he's going to be meeting with the governor of California, or he was met at the airport by the governor of California. I guess they're going to have some meetings. The big question in California, of course, or the big question out there is any of the assistance that the federal government is going to have to put in, because look, they're going to need a lot of money out there. I don't think that California has the money to rebuild this. So they're going to have to really go to Washington and get some help. So the big question is that help going to come with conditions, or is it just going to be a check for whatever the amount is? I think the consensus in the Senate and in the House, particularly in the House, the Speaker the other day said there had to be conditions and how the money goes out there. And those conditions mean that they're going to have to be better prepared, basically. They're going to have to figure out a way of making sure that the water is available and that they can respond better to these kinds of catastrophes. And what exactly the conditions are, I guess we will see. But I do believe there has to be some accountability, some sense of conditions so that California gets back on its feet as soon as possible, but corrects the mistakes that got them in trouble in the first place. I mean, I talk to people out there and everybody's so frustrated with the state government, and not just because of the fires, but in general. California has become overtaxed, overregulated. It seems like government functions for the benefit of the public sector union, and that's it. It doesn't do a very good job for the taxpayers. The crime is a problem. The infrastructure is crumbling. You know, you all heard about that high-speed train that was supposed to connect, I guess, LA and San Francisco. I think that was, I believe, the intent. It just never got built, or it was a mess, or it's still being built. You look at the state of San Francisco, you look at the state of LA, and these cities are going nowhere. I mean, people go to LA and they feel like they're in a third world country. Garbage everywhere, you know, just a total chaos everywhere. And I think so there have to be some conditions. There has to be some way of at least assuring the taxpayers of the United States, the people in the other 49 states, as they say, who are going to be bailing them out, that this kind of thing is not going to happen again. Now, there are going to be fires in the future, but California needs to be better prepared for those fires. They need to have a better sense of what they are, how they're going to handle them. And I think for many people in the outside, fair or unfair, now this may be an unfair criticism or maybe it is fair, but for many people in the outside, I think it looks to many of us like California was more interested in diversity than in making sure that the fire hydrants had water. And what is the use of having a government if the fire hydrants don't have water? What is the use of paying the taxes that people pay out there if the fire hydrants don't have running water? I mean, what is the use? I mean, at some point, people begin to question whether the government is a good deal or not. And Bill Maher, who's not a conservative, this is exactly what he said the other day on TV. He said, look, you know, I know it's complicated, but that's why, to quote him, that's why I pay 17% of my taxes, so that people can figure this out. And it's obvious that they didn't figure it out in California. So I want to help them. I think everybody wants to help them. Nobody likes to see people destroyed like this. But there have to be some changes in how they run the business out there. And so far, you know, we'll see. We'll see. But the money will come, but it's going to come with conditions. I'm pretty sure that's the way it's going to be. Now, one story today is the pro-life march. You know, we had grown accustomed to this march over the years because of Roe v. Wade. Now that Roe v. Wade is history, the march still goes on because the fight still goes on. There are still many states that allow abortion without conditions. But I think the battle has been won, at least in the Supreme Court. But you got to go beyond that. And I think all these people who are marching today understand that there's more to this than overturning Roe v. Wade. And in many states, you're seeing challenges to the abortion, or at least you're seeing different situations. And that's the way it was meant to be. It was meant to put this in the hands of the citizens through their legislatures, so that they would have the opportunity to pay for all of this and to have whatever abortion rules they wanted to have in their respective states. And that's kind of where we are right now. Where we're at right now is you got 50 states, and most of them have one, allow abortions in some type. Others are more restrictive, but at least the states are doing it. The states are doing it, and that's the way it was really supposed to be. But a great march today. Vice President Vance spoke at the march. I thought he gave a wonderful speech. And what always amazes me about this march in Washington, D.C., that it's usually pretty cold in Washington, and yet people show up to march, and that's pretty That's pretty impressive, to say the least. Well, on this day in history, we remember something that happened 60 years ago today, and that was the death of Winston Churchill, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who passed away at age 90. And I remember that. I remember the funeral specifically of the late Prime Minister. I remember that funeral, watching it on television. And of course, Churchill was one of the great leaders of the 20th century, certainly in the top two or three of the most important men in the century. He was a central figure during World War II, and for many, the man who saved Britain in those very dark days. But Winston Churchill passed away 60 years ago, and I've got a post today over on my blog. You may want to check this out, where I talk about how Winston Churchill became a fan of Cuban cigars. And what happened was that a young Winston Churchill was sent to Cuba. This is colonial Cuba. This is before the Spanish-American War. This is before, Spain, or this is when Spain was still colonizing Cuba. And a young Winston Churchill was sent to Cuba in a project to see how the Spanish army was fighting the war. And while he was there, he fell in love with Cuban cigars, and he started smoking them and smoked them all the way to his death. He never gave up cigars. I don't know how he got away with it, but he never gave up cigars. I think he was smoking them to the very end of his life. But he was a huge fan of Cuban cigars, and he picked up the habit when he was a young man in Cuba, and he went to see the Spanish, how the Spanish were fighting the rebellion in Cuba. And this would have been, I guess, in the 1890s. And he fell in love with Cuban cigars and smoked them all the way to his death. And that was the image of, every time you think of Winston Churchill, you think of the victory sign, of course, but you always think of him and a Cuban cigar, and a big cigar. The big cigars that came to be known as Churchills, they were long cigars. And that's the image that we have of Winston Churchill, one of my favorite people, one of my absolutely favorite people, Winston Churchill. Great movie that I would recommend if you get a chance. It should be available wherever you catch movies. But the great movie called Young Winston, a story of his life when he was a very young man. It's a great movie to watch. Well, anyway, I can talk about Winston Churchill all day because he was truly one of my favorites. Have a wonderful day, everybody. This is Silvio Cantu in Dallas. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you later.